Hi, it's Karen here from the Opticon Visual Stress Clinic. Now, it's safe to assume that you are looking for ways to help your child, your students, your patients, or perhaps even yourself with learning challenges. Well, this presentation is designed for you. The influences of visual stress on learning. Now, visual stress is not a learning disability or an attention disorder, but it can certainly contribute to difficulties. And that is because visual stress is a visual perceptual processing problem. It can cause headaches, eye strain, difficulties with reading, writing, concentration, comprehension, and discomfort in the learning environment, whether that be in the classroom or online. In this presentation, you will learn about visual stress and the triggers that cause it so that you can take action to remove or reduce them. Simply making modifications to the visual environment and providing specially designed tools and technologies can reduce visual stress-related learning and attention difficulties.
Well, first of all, I'm a parent. I'm a mother of a child with visual stress. He also has dyslexia and executive functioning challenges. So my husband and I, Robert, we started Opticon because of him. His misdiagnosis of ADHD and the learning challenges that he had going through elementary school led us to find a solution. What's going on? Why are we having so much difficulty trying to get him help and to address the symptoms and the issues that he had? And once he got his precision tinted glasses, it was just a friend who said, have you thought of color? And we did everything we could to investigate it. Once he got those precision tinted lenses on, I think it was about the end of grade 5. By the end of grade 6, when he graduated from elementary school, he received an award as the most improved student in the school, and actually a check from the community association. It was a surprise to all of us, but it was really wonderful to see that this is something that turned things around for him. And we noticed a huge difference. He actually thanked me. I remember him saying, thank you, Mommy, for not making me take those pills anymore. And that was the ADHD medication. He didn't need it because even in further psycho assessments, he did not have ADHD, and he does not. So at this point, he's graduated from 4 years at Carleton University doing his Bachelor of Information Technology with a focus in interactive multimedia and design. And you'll see some of his work in this presentation. So looking back at our story, it was 2011 when we sat out back and said, let's do this. Let's help people. Let's try and find out how we can get this stuff here in Canada. And in 2015, I opened the Visual Stress Clinic. So it was a building here in Canada. We had, at the height of the clinic, we had 3 full-time people, we had part-time staff, and we had students that were helping us out. And with COVID, things changed. People moved home, people moved off to other jobs. And so here we are in 2021, and we have a few changes, wonderful changes actually. Wanting to get this in front of more people than just those in Ottawa. And I mean, it's great. We've seen over 700 clients, and we've helped all of them with precision tinted lenses and other assistive tools and technology. But this medical device, which is what we use to determine the unique tint for each person, we're now going to be the Canadian distributor, the sole Canadian distributor for the product. And we've got the Health Canada approval, the device license, to be able to distribute this medical device in the country. So that's pretty exciting for us. We're going to have a busy next couple of months because we just got the contract signed. So this will be something that will be going out to optometrists within the next couple months so that more people will have access to the assessments and the eventual lenses and other tools. So that's enough about us. You guys are here to learn about visual stress. So visual stress is not a problem of the eyes. It is a problem of the brain. You would think that it might have something to do with the eyes because of the word visual. And there are certainly stressors to the visual system, like the amount of computer work that's going on these days and allergies. Those are the kinds of things that can affect our eyes and our vision. But visual stress is a neurological condition. And just to add to that right now, I should say this in the beginning, that anyone with vision, reading, learning, or attention difficulties should see an optometrist to rule out problems of the eyes. It's surprising the number of people that we see in the clinic that are coming to us as a referral from their neurologist or their occupational therapist or their some of the educators who children come to us just from referrals from word of mouth. And the first question I ask is, who's their optometrist? And it's surprising how many people don't have one, have never been, just saw their family doctor for their vision. And to be honest, it's the first place to go when you're having issues with learning and reading. Well, what do you use to collect that information? You collect it from your eyes. So if the eyes aren't working properly, the information's not going to be gathered properly. So have to always mention that. We focus on the brain, so the visual cortex back here at the back of your head, but it comes in from the eyes, so you have to have that checked first. So, like I said, information enters the eyes, it travels along the visual pathways, and then it enters the visual cortex. The visual cortex is where the information is stored, it's organized, or sorry, sorted, organized, and then sent forward to the rest of the brain for further processing. And if the visual cortex is having difficulties, if it's not processing properly, then that can lead to problems. It's called a hyperactivation of the visual cortex. So visual stress occurs when the brain becomes overexcited, and in the words in science, they use hyperactivated. And what that means is the brain, this area of the brain is not doing well with the information it's receiving. So it sends a call out for help. And what that means is blood is rushing to the area to try and help it function. There's something wrong, alerts are going. And what happens is it gets waterlogged. It triggers discomfort. And the best analogy I've had actually to describe this to people is blushing. When you blush, okay, right now my cheeks are soft, but when you blush, blood rushes to the area. It fills it up, turns it red, it becomes prickly and hard and really uncomfortable. And if you don't remove yourself from that situation, it can go blushing up to your forehead, down to your neck. I'm sure you've seen that in people or you've experienced it yourself. Once you remove yourself from that situation, everything can calm down and go back to normal and back to the way it was before you were embarrassed. Well, that same kind of activity is going on in the brain. Blood is rushing to the area, and until you remove yourself from that situation, which could mean just closing your eyes and palming, it could mean turning off the lights, unless you stop doing that, it's just going to keep coming. So more and more blood comes to the area, and it can actually end up being quite disturbing and filling up with blood. Like, this is an over-exaggeration, this image here, but that's the idea, is it starts in the visual cortex and it can just move throughout the rest of the brain. Now, when the brain's not functioning properly, when the visual cortex is hyperactivated, it can lead to a series of difficulties. So the first one is physical discomfort. You've got this area back here, it's starting to heat up. It can be painful. It can lead to dizziness and nausea, and certainly fatigue. It's very tiring to have all of those systems firing and all of that blood rushing there. And because of the perceptual distortions, children can be straining to see because things aren't clear. It can lead to balance problems because the world is not perceived clearly. Things like blurriness. Now, you could go to the optometrist and the optometrist would say your eyes are fine, you don't need glasses, but you could experience intermittent blurriness. So every once in a while, things fade in, fade out. That is what happens with people who have visual stress. So they explain that things are blurry, but there's no corrective measure for the eyes. There are no glasses required. It's simply a perceptual issue that's happening in the brain. People who have visual stress are hypersensitive to light and glare, and so they could feel like they need to turn lights off or wear sunglasses. And then all of this can lead to behavioral issues, because it's very frustrating when you're struggling but the other person in the class beside you isn't, or it's very frustrating when you're trying to explain what it is you're struggling through, but people aren't believing that you're saying, when you say the words are moving. It can lead to anxiety because you don't want to go places where you know you're going to have these this discomfort and see these perceptual distortions and avoidance. And certainly with our concussion population that we see in the clinic, there's a lot of depression because they've gone a few years now trying to figure out, why am I wanting to wear sunglasses all the time? Why can't I tolerate light? Why can't I get back to the way I was before? And so it can lead to a lot of depression. Now, when you think about children, and Nicholas, my son, for example, he didn't realize that what he was experiencing wasn't what we experienced, because he never had it any different. And that's the same thing with a lot of children. They don't know, there's no before and after. Whereas our concussion clients, there's a before. They could read, they could work on the computer, they could tolerate light, and now there's the after when they can't. So I think we have to remember that children may not report things because they don't know that it's any different from what you might experience. So let's go to the next one. So what is it that triggers this reaction? So it wasn't until like 2015, after 2010, where brain scanning technology was good enough that we could actually see what was happening in the brains of people with visual stress. The SPECT scans, functional MRIs, near infrared spectroscopy, the QEEG, all of these different scans were demonstrating that these brains are hyperactivating in the presence of certain trigger images. Fortunately, they also showed that that reaction was reduced quite substantially when precision filters were used. So we'll talk about the filters later. Let's talk about why it's happening. But using colored light or filters of the visual information could then reverse that hyperactivity. And so certain types of triggers cause this stress to certain types of brains. So we'll talk about the WHO later as well. I mentioned the percentage of the population there. It's about 15. So our visual system, the humans that we are today, it's evolved over 540 million years of evolution. And this evolution of our visual system, now you know all different animals have all different types of visual systems, all based on where they live. We saw a show today about sharks with eyeballs on the end of their noses, and their visual system developed to work optimally in the environment that they are living in. Okay, so for human beings, for us, our visual system was developed in the natural environment. So natural light, low contrast, soft transitions from one color to another, very soft and muted colors, and a slow and quiet visual environment. That's where our visual system works optimally. Now you've heard for many years, get out in nature, get out, it'll help your visual system, take a break from what you're doing and look at a tree and that sort of thing. And the reason is because this environment we're living in now, this built environment, is so far removed from that environment where our visual system is comfortable that 20% of the population has a really hard time dealing with it. It's artificial light. It's high contrasts. They're hard transitions, bright colors. Everything's fast and so much louder. And it's not just one thing we do in the day that's like this. It's from the minute we get up at home, in our homes and our bedrooms and our houses, getting in our cars, going to our work or school, doing our shopping after work. Actually, there's a book, I don't have it here with me, it's downstairs in the studio, but it's a book from the Neuro-Optometric Rehabilitation Association in the US. And they have a chapter on colorimetry and visual stress. And the woman writing the article, she calls it Walmart syndrome. And she calls it Walmart syndrome for good reason. Think about places like Walmart where they have the overhead lights and the stacked things on shelves and the fast movement and the noises. Visual stress, that's a terrible place for someone with visual stress to go. So when you think about those visual environments, and I mentioned the difference between the two of them, the triggers to visual stress, the first one is patterns, a sensitivity to patterns. So you think about those images, everything like lined up, and square, that high contrast pattern in our built environment is a trigger to visual stress. Pattern is also found in text. So text can trigger visual stress. Movement is a trigger. And movement comes from like TV and video games and scrolling on your computer screen. The fast pace of our life, going from one place to another, there's very little time to just regroup and, I guess, meditate, that kind of thing that you might do much more often if you were in a natural environment. Excuse me for a minute. Oh, my nose. Talking about allergies earlier in the eyes. Third thing is light. Light is a trigger. Now, light, the on-off flicker of light is movement. Light, bright and dark, sort of that pattern. Everything's interrelated here. So light can trigger visual stress, especially unnatural light like fluorescence, lights that flicker. And the fourth one is color. Now, color, some people will have a favorite color. We see a lot of clients in the clinic that will, once they find out what their color is, they'll say, oh, well, that explains why I just redid all my house. I decorated everything in purple. Their color was purple. So when you're a child, if you have a child or a student who leans toward a color that they like, they enjoy, it could mean that the reason is that color makes them feel calmer. That color is more comfortable to them. So usually on the other side of the spectrum is the color that is their trigger color. So we find that a lot when we do our testing in the clinic. I'm just going to scroll through my notes here. I always get ahead of myself, and if I don't do this, then I get off track very easily. I could talk about this for hours and hours, so we don't have hours and hours here, so let's just do this. All right. So I mentioned pattern was the #1 trigger. So in the United Kingdom, there's been a lot of research in optometry hospitals, and the researchers there have made a point of training the optometrists, the people in optometry, about what they call pattern glare. So it's the sensitivity to patterns and glare and light, and giving them tools to identify pattern sensitivity. Because, and it's noted here with the arrow, it's not identified in standard vision assessments. You could be presenting optometrically normal, yet complaining about seeing things or perceiving things different, having difficulty perceiving things. I'm going to use an example of one of the children I saw quite early in the clinic. Her optometrist said there was nothing wrong with her eyes. She could see clearly, and it was true. When you asked her to look at a word on the page, she could see it quite clearly and it was quite crisp. But then I asked her, why is it that you're having difficulty reading them? And she said, it's the gold lines moving in and out through the words that makes it hard to see them sometimes. So she went, and her mom went to the optometrist knowing that she had some visual stress symptoms. The optometrist asked all the right questions for an optometry assessment, but she wasn't given an opportunity to answer that it's the gold lines running through, and you'll see an image later that we made to represent this. It's not catching it. Now, we want you to make sure you see an optometrist to make sure that they can rule out any vision issues. And to be honest, there are vision specialists that do much more than the regular optometrist, and they look at binocular instability, and they look at teaming and midline shifts and things like that. And eye exercises can sometimes help children deal with some of these difficulties with their eyes. Just like you would go to a physiotherapist to address some physical issues, say with your injured elbow, you can go to an optometrist who will look at the physio aspects of your eyes, and that's where you have the exercises and things to help with the eye muscles. Right. So a little bit of a history of visual stress. Researchers have been studying this since the late 1980s, and I actually went and I started printing off some papers that I wanted to share with you, and I've got this stack here, and I said, no, I can't do that. that's another day. There's so much research on visual stress. It's been 40 years in the making. So in the 1980s, independent from each other, Olive Myers was a teacher in New Zealand, and she discovered that children doing their work on different colored paper made it easier for some of them. They found that some colors for certain children made it easier for them to read off the page. At the same time, Helen Erlen was studying adult learners in the US, excuse me, and she discovered that by putting colored overlays, they were actually the plastic used in studios to change the lighting on stage, that by putting these plastic sheets on top of reading material, her students were able to read better. At the same time, Dr. Wilkins in the United Kingdom was studying epilepsy, migraine, and patterns and how this triggered discomfort. And when he read the work of these other two, he realized this may be a solution to help his population and all the work that he's been doing. So work took off in the United Kingdom, and the 90s were so filled with research in this area. Children in school, whole school boards were tested. They developed the first intuitive colorimeter. They developed a full series of overlays to make sure that they represented the color spectrum properly. All of this development was done in the 90s, and there's really quite a mass of information from this time. So they discovered that it was real. They discovered how it seemed to be happening, and they found a solution that would help. The intuitive, so in the 2000s, that's when the brain scanning started, which gave them a real look inside the brain to see what was actually happening and how the treatments that they found were working to correct for it. Now here we are in 2020s, and I get research notifications every day from all over the world in all sorts of different languages. So it's great that it's not just the US and the UK anymore. There's a lot of activity right now going on in Brazil. So I'm getting papers in Spanish and getting those translated. So it's really well supported and accepted that visual stress exists, and precision filters and other tools can really help to reduce it. So next. All right, this is an important one because some of you, now maybe in the chat, if you can tell me if you're familiar with the term Erlen Syndrome, just put a little Erlen in there. If you are, it'll come up and show me. This is a topic that I like to talk about because actually my son's first lenses were Erlen lenses, and that's how we learned about visual stress. Now, the term scotopic sensitivity, this, please don't ever use this term. Please, I don't even want to put it in the presentation sometimes, but I want people to understand that this is what they thought it was in the 80s. They didn't understand that it was something going on with the brain, and they thought it was the light receptor cells in the eyes. It is not that. So I'm going to delete that. That's done. We're not going to talk about it anymore. Now, Erlen syndrome, great. Helen Erlen discovered that this worked. She developed a process. She developed a team of people, named the condition, and they do precision tinting. Yes, they don't use a medical device like we do, and they will find tints for people. So I have nothing against them. Just what I decided, since my background was in new business development, and my whole family, they're all doctors and researchers, I knew I had to find a solution that was supported by the medical community, that used research-based tools and devices to determine the right color of the lenses, and that process was the one that was out there being used in research. So I went to the UK, Robert came with me. I've been there 3 times now, and the researcher's been here 3 times doing presentations. But we went there to learn about it and to bring the tools back to Canada. So in 2012, we bought our first colorimeter, and we've got the new one we've had it for a year, the new Curve device, which I'll talk about later. But in any case, visual stress is now the universally accepted term for visual stress. So Erlen, the organization, uses visual stress as well. And you could consider Erlen as like a brand name for their process of identifying visual stress. All right. So who is most likely to suffer from visual stress? So that's why you guys are here. We're going to talk about who and how we can, how they're different. So migraine and actual seizure disorders. So epilepsy and migraine were the first two conditions that were heavily researched for the existence of visual stress, this neural hyperactivation, and the relief of that hyperactivation with the use of precision filters. Since then, investigation has gone into dyslexia and ADHD, Lyme disease, chronic fatigue. Recently, within the last 2 years, a lot of work in the area of autism spectrum disorder and how their visual hypersensitivity and their difficulties in visual perception and facial expressions can be improved with the use of filter lenses. Anxiety disorders, because again, as I mentioned earlier, people get anxious going into situations where they know they're going to experience pain and discomfort. And by relaxing the brain and making them more comfortable in those environments, it can really help with anxiety or disorders as well. One thing I want to make sure, dyslexia and visual stress are two completely different conditions, but they often overlap. And unfortunately, the idea that words move is often called dyslexia or named visual dyslexia. That is actually visual stress. So it can co-occur with dyslexia. So you can have both, or you can have neither. Like I told you, my son has dyslexia and visual stress, but they're totally separate conditions. And by relieving the visual stress, it makes the dyslexia easier to manage. There are a lot of papers on all of these conditions. Let me just look here. So in neurology, psychology, neuroscience, optometry, all sorts of different journals and publications over the years. There's so much, but I just wanted to have a few on here for you to see. Flip to the next page. Chronic fatigue, visual snow. That's another one that some of you might have heard of, is visual snow. So there's pure visual snow. There's visual snow overlapped with visual stress, and there's pure visual stress. So we're starting to see a lot more people who are diagnosed with visual snow, and some we can make a difference with the filters, and some we make a full difference. There's no visual snow, and others, they still experience that visual snow, and there's nothing we can do about that. But often there's overlap with that condition as well. So specifically to dyslexia, ADHD, and visual stress, these conditions have different areas of the brain, which is the condition. So you've got the dyslexia area here, ADHD, it's often in these areas of the brain, and visual stress is over here. So you can see there are three different brain disorders, but when we combine it, it can be quite overwhelming. So if we can do at least something to help reduce the visual stress, then we can help the rest of the brain deal with the other conditions that it's got going on. Excuse me for a minute. Give you guys a chance to catch up and make your notes and get your questions down. Excuse me. All right. So how does this hyperactivation lead to the symptoms? And it is kind of a vicious circle. The visual cortex, so it's back here, the pain, the pressure, and the heat can drain a lot of energy from people. And because it's so dense, it slows down processing. So it's like a traffic jam of information that's happening in the brain. There's a backlog. It comes to the visual cortex, it's slower processing, but the visual information keeps coming in and it piles up, which is what causes the slower processing and which causes the ghosting images, or which causes the overlap. Sometimes people see double. It's because their brain is seeing it and then seeing it, and it's starting to overlap in the brain, and it doesn't get processed and sent through fast enough. So we get 3D imaging and doubling up. And that's a loss in clarity. So the third step is the clarity. It's blurry, it's not blurry, I'm having trouble seeing it. Then that fatigue of trying so hard to do the task, but it's difficult and it's tiring, and then it gets frustrating. And the perceptual illusions, the visual illusions that are happening can be really quite troublesome. And because the environment could look, or text or the environment could look like it's off balance or moving, it leads to vestibular issues. So people who come to us are sometimes reporting they're seeing vestibular therapists. Well, if we can help clarify the visual environment, so if they're walking down a hallway, and I've seen this so many times with our clients, they may have a cane or they may walk sort of holding the wall for balance. When they get their lenses on, because now the hallway looks straight and the doorways aren't bothering them, they can walk fine straight forward without feeling a sense of being off balance. So by clearing up the visual perception that is a result of this visual stress, it can stop that vicious circle. So calm things down a little bit in the environment. Now, all of that can make it very difficult to read, and it can make it very difficult to concentrate. So when you look at these two columns of symptoms, yeah, it's going to be hard to read if the words are moving or they're going out of focus or it's bright to look at. I have to use my finger to track. Why? Well, because if I don't, I lose where the words go. Well, why do you lose where the words go? Because they're moving up and down. But if I put my finger on them, it'll keep, okay. So asking and asking and asking those questions will help us understand what it is that's making that reading so hard to do. And hey, it sure is difficult to concentrate in the bright lights. When I have to reread lines, the story just doesn't make sense. And I can't block out the distractions anyways, because my visual system is so hyperactivated that I'm getting feedback, I'm getting information from all areas. That's one thing I want to mention here, is that when you have visual stress and the brain is having difficulty managing the visual environment, the brain has a hard time focusing and ignoring what's going on around. And because of that, it can either get locked in that focal vision of just, I can only see this thing, I'm ignoring everything else around me, or it can just be so overwhelming that they just have to shut things down because the visual environment is just too overwhelming. These are examples of what people have described to us, and we use this in the clinic to help people after we've done the testing and they've told us all the things that they're experiencing. We use these images to help them further explain what they experience. And so many people will go, oh my God, that is what I've been trying to describe to people. This is what's happening. The bottom right one there is what that little girl was seeing when she was trying to read. So sure, the word sensitivity is clear. I can see that, no problem. But the rest of it's all covered up. The colored spots, sometimes people see multiple colors, sometimes they see rainbows, sometimes it's just behind the words, there's a glow. But we get a lot of the waving, a lot of the movement, which is when it's really hard to track where the words are and to lose their place. All right, so we've covered the who and the what and the when. So the who, people with hyperexcitable and hypersensitive brains. And those neurological and neurodevelopmental conditions include ADHD and learning difficulties, migraine, brain injury, and so on. So we also know what? It's a neurological condition, not a problem of the eyes. We've seen when it can happen. So when the visual system is exposed to busy, high contrast, bright visual information, and that where is in the built unnatural environment. So things like classrooms and workplaces with cubicles, although we're all at home now working, but still we need to look at the visual environment at home and kind of reduce the clutter to reduce the visual information. And we saw why. So the brain is hypersensitive to visual stimuli, but not everybody is sensitive to the same degree. So how can we stop this? And what can you do to help your child, yourself, your students? So really there are three main steps. The first one is to identify it. So there are tools we use before we even see someone in the clinic. We send out something called a visual stress symptom index. And that index gives us a really good idea of what symptoms the individual is experiencing, and do those indicate that it could be visual stress and that we could be able to help them. And there's something I mentioned, the visual stress checklist. I'll have a link to that at the end. I'll go over that a little bit with you. But really identifying, so you've got all the symptoms of the you've got all the symptoms of dyslexia. There's overlap, but let's take a look at the ones that are possible visual stress and set those aside and go, okay, so we're dealing with all of these things. This group of symptoms, it could mean that that's something that's going on here. So the next step is to get assessed. Now, there are some self-assessment tools, but first of all, optometry, like I said, get assessed that way. And then get assessed with either the intuitive colorimeter or even with, there's some other things that we can use, like we've got screen tinting software. So some of our clients will go and use that software and say, you know what, I used it and I found out that when I put it on a green filter, it's much more comfortable. Okay, that's a really good indicator that going further and getting lenses would help. Things like overlays are great for reading and learning, but it doesn't translate to lenses. So assessments with overlays are really good to identify that, hey, color makes a difference and color is really uncomfortable. So using the overlays can help identify that there is a sensitivity and there is some relief to be found. And then once we figure out what the tools are that work best to relieve symptoms, it's accommodating with them. And we talked about the visual environment. So one of the things you can do to accommodate is to alter the visual environment. You can use filters, or you can change the lights, or you can make modifications to the visual environment. I'm going to go into that into a bit more detail. Oh, there we go. So there's the identify. So if you go to the link opticon.ca checklist, you can download this visual stress checklist. And it's kind of a recap of the presentation in the sense that it goes through what visual stress is and what are the stressors and the triggers. And then it has quite a few questions that you can check off. Now, something that I want to make clear here is when you're asking these questions, if you're a parent doing it with your child, ask the questions and let them answer it. And don't say, well, no, it's not moving. Say, okay, so it's moving, or so you see stars. Okay, sometimes what I found in the past was, and I've even seen parents who would be in an assessment and the child is opening up to me and they're telling me about the things that are happening and the parents going, no, it's not doing that, because they don't see it, but the child is. So we have to be careful, obviously, you know that, to let them share and let them provide the information. And some of the questions, like, are you sensitive to patterns? Well, really you have to go, okay, where are some patterns for us to look at? Or let's think about, and when you're looking around your home, you may not have thought of that before, but when you're looking around your home, I just look now and I'm like, oh, look at the pattern over there. I never really noticed it until I went looking for pattern. So when you're going around your visual environment, you'll find things that you didn't realize were there because you just overlooked them. So identifying is the first one. And then assessing. So this is a good time for me to explain about light. So when people are sensitive to light or say they're sensitive to light, it's not the white light that they're sensitive to. Well, they are, because the colors that they're sensitive to are in that white light. We need to find out what frequency of light within that light that they're sensitive to. So I like to use the analogy of sound. When you're sensitive to a high frequency or low frequency sound, you're able to tell somebody that. So in the room right now, I can hear my computer, my fan is on. So if I were sensitive to that sound, I'd be like, okay, I need to do something. That sound is bothering me. You either turn it off, move somewhere else, or if severe enough, you can go to a hearing specialist and they'll fine tune a hearing aid for you that'll block out those sensitive wavelengths of sound. However, with light, we're not able to have a white light on and then say, oh, I'm really sensitive to the yellow wavelengths coming out of that light. We aren't able to break it down that way. So we use that medical device, the intuitive colorimeter, in our assessments to go through the full frequency of light. We go through 360 degrees of color in 50 different levels of saturation and with 4 different levels of gray or reduction in luminance. So I think it comes to like 150,000 different colors. And with the overlays, our kits, there's one with 10 and there's another one with 9 and another one with 11. And by having all of these different overlays, we can really fine tune the overlays as well. Surprising, someone will at the end of the assessment will have 3 different colors of, say, turquoise, and be very adamant that that one that looks almost exactly the same as the one beside it is so much better than the other. So I think we can get about 30 different colors when we do the overlays. But so assessing to find out what wavelengths of color you're sensitive to so that we can create filters to block those wavelengths. Accommodate by modifying the visual environment, so altering lighting. I did an assessment in a home once, and it was like a hot mess of visual stress triggers for this poor child. So when she would do her homework, she would sit at a table, a shiny, glossy dining room table, big patio doors to the side, black and white patterned artwork across from her, and overhead were those little, and it's pictured here on the presentation, the fluorescent light bulbs were in the chandelier. So I think there were 5 of them. So here she is trying to do her homework, and she's got all these lighting sources, the pattern images, and so those are the kinds of things that you can make changes to. Put a matte brown or black fabric on the table so that it's not shiny. Don't be facing a patterned image when you're doing the homework, and take a look at the light sources. In our home, before we knew what visual stress was, we already had dimmers on all of our light switches. So every house we've moved to, it's been like, let's take the dimmers with us because we know we're going to need it at the next house. And one of the things we were the same. In our kitchen, we had the fluorescent sun ceiling on a white marble countertop in the kitchen while I'm making dinner, trying to have our son do his homework. So hot mess of visual stress triggers before we figured it out. So hopefully this gives you an idea of the kinds of things that you might do to accommodate at home. And stripes and patterns, again, I said they're all over. They're the blinds. Think about window coverings. When you have vertical or horizontal blinds and they're partially open, it's that light, dark, it's a pattern. They even sometimes move in the wind. I was in a classroom, we were videoing our video from 2012, and we were in a classroom like, oh, this is perfect. Look how awful these blinds are. And the window was open and the blinds were waving. I thought, oh, that's even worse. So children in the classroom who are sensitive to patterns and have visual stress, these things are all over without anybody really knowing it. Heritage Academy, when I was there speaking to them, they had removed their, they used soft colored paper, don't use the fluorescent lights, and they always have the blinds fully open or fully closed because they know that those triggers affect the students. So if you can do any of this at home to modify or change, it can be very helpful. So you can also accommodate with things like screen tinting software. I don't have a link for it here, but and I do need to send you a link to download it. But if you email me at the info@Opticon or kmonet@opticon.ca, I can do a WeTransfer for you to do a trial of the software. It's a 1-month free trial to see if that helps. And also instructions on changing any Apple product. It's something that Apple added to their last iOS 10, where color filters are now a part of the display accommodation area. So I have instructions on that. But something in that same line that's been really popular, and actually they're sold out of the product, are these e-ink computer monitors and tablets. There's one company that creates this e-ink, they're called e-ink technology, and they produce the material for Kobos and all the tone-on-tone black gray e-readers. But now they're making computer monitors and full-size tablets that there's no color, there's no backlight, there's a little bit of flicker each time you change the screen, but it's not a constant flicker, so you can look away when you're changing a screen. And they're getting better and better processors in them. So these e-ink products have been really, I've got a waiting list, I think of about 6 people right now waiting for them to come back in stock. So you can filter the visual image or you can reduce the light. And then we mentioned the overlays as well. And don't forget paper and pens. I mentioned this a lot, and I remember I used to talk about this at the office. They're like, oh, who cares about paper and pens? But it makes a big difference. And when we're doing our assessments, and I explain that to my clients, they're like, okay, so if I have to proof a written document, print it out on, let's say their color was green, print it out on green paper. Now you've got your green pen and your green paper, or whatever combination you find best. It's so much easier now to look at that document. So overlays are great when you don't need to write on the material. You can just put the overlay on top. But the colored paper is really great when you're writing. So think about a child doing a math test on graph paper, or using graph paper. That's a pattern. That's a pretty bad pattern because it's going both directions. If we can reduce the difficulty looking at that pattern by printing it on light purple paper or whatever their color is, I don't know. Our paper color kit here has 30 some different colors of paper that I've sourced from, yeah, places like Staples, but also print houses that just have the manufacturer's different colors of paper that you can't just buy. You can't buy at the Staples. So we have all these different colors of paper, and it makes a big difference, not only for writing, but also for printing. And we would recommend not printing at full black, print like a 70% gray, and that reduces that contrast. And by adding the color makes it much more comfortable to look at. You can buy colored pens at the dollar store pretty much, but it makes it's a very helpful thing. But the best thing to do is to accommodate with precision tinted lenses. And that's because the whole environment is filtered now. So it's really great to, pen to paper, but you're still in that fully lit trigger environment. It's really great to have the software on your computer, but you still have all the other visual stimuli going on around you in the room. So and you can't take your colored light bulb with you when you go shopping. You've got your colored light at home, but you can't take that with you to Walmart. So the lenses are the best thing, and it's not a fashion tint. You can't, more comfortable than nothing. If you go to a store and find colored glasses, it will be more comfortable than nothing, but it won't be addressing the neurohyperactivity going on in the brain. It'll reduce the amount of light, and you might be in the right spectrum, but it's not going to give you the same reaction, that same, like the brain scans can see the before and after. These are medical tints. They're designed to block certain wavelengths of light depending on what was identified in the colorimeter. And the medical device is the thing that identifies what's the best tint. Now, I didn't say that properly. The individual who is looking in the colorimeter identifies the color that works best. The colorimeter just gives us the option of showing all of the different colors. So we don't make the decision, it's the individual who makes the decision on which one works best. I wish we could have a brain scanner in the clinic and I could have them hooked up and say, oh, look, this is the one where your brain calms down, but we leave it up to them. And honestly, they're sitting in front of the device and they'll go, oh. You get that relaxing. We've seen children really agitated, all of a sudden go, and just calmly looking at the light in the box. It's really a thing to see. The lab that does our tinting, that developed the colorimeter, as a research project, tracked 1,000 consecutive lens orders, and those orders are plotted on this color diagram here. So there's a bit of a concentration in sort of the limey green, and there's a bit of a concentration in the bluish purple, but there's not enough of a concentration in any one color to say, all right, we only need to make 5 colors. No, if you did 5 colors, you'd be missing the other 95 people of the 100 that you were testing. So and here, actually, I put these in here because this on the green ones, those 3 lenses were in the same order package that we got back. And I know they're different because they're different levels of gray. Some have more green, some have more turquoise. They all look really similar. And I had the people come and pick them up at the same time and ask them, would you be able to wear the other person's glasses? And they're like, no, give me my glasses back. It was enough of a difference, each one of these, to make them much more comfortable in the one that they had picked. They didn't want to have the other ones. And just to show you, these blue ones all came in together as well. A light blue, a darker blue purple, and then more of a pure blue and a blue turquoise. So the reason why I have the paint chips there is you wouldn't go to the paint store and say, could you please get me some blue paint? There's so many different aspects to that blue paint, and you'd have to take it home and check it in your natural light in your environment to pick the right blue for you. And that's what we do with the color emitters. We help people find the right color for them. And it's going to be different their brains are different than the next person's brain, and each person's different, and so is their color. These are a couple of the pictures of the frames. Again, when we get our packages of finished glasses in from the lab, the colors are so various, and we've been, over the last couple of years, been taking a lot of pictures of the glasses as they come in, and this shows the variety. And so many people helped with the colors, and so many different colors and so many different frames. It's really a joy to see. So here's that checklist, opticon.ca/checklist for getting your getting that so that you can access it to fill it in for yourself or your child. And thank you. So I hope that was good. We're at just under an hour. Marianne, I have a lot of time for questions. I'm not sure how much time you have for questions, but let's go.
Let's rock and roll, and we'll see them. We've already got our first question coming in. I've made a couple of notes myself too, but okay. We'll start with Sarah's question. Karen, can you comment on how a readalizer assessment relates to visual stress?
Oh, I shouldn't do that. I'm going to change the screen here. A readalizer. Now, I have seen a readalizer. I know there was a woman, she moved out of town, and I know she was doing that. I don't have full knowledge of it, but I think they have like 2 different colors, one in each eye, or they use red. I can't really comment on that, but they're not identifying a precision color. They're trying different lenses of their stock, like 3 colors. I'm not sure. I'd have to look into it in more detail, but from what I recall, they're not getting a precision tint. They're using a tint that has may get a result, but I'm not exactly sure. I'm sorry, I can't answer that. I'm going to look it up though. I'm going to put readalizer. And what I'll do for questions like this that I can't answer right away, I know I've thought of it and I know I've seen it. I will do what we were saying earlier and find the answer and then share that with the group, okay?
Perfect. I'll fill in with one of my my questions. I'm wondering, and I'm going to try to see how I can formulate this as a question, with this sort of newer technology in terms of assistive technology, are you, and that's how I would consider it, like a tool, you know, as one of the, you know, tools in a child's toolbox. Are you seeing schools, these being applied, or these principles being applied in schools or IEPs even?
Well, first I'll answer the school question, and the French Catholic School Board is fantastic. They have somebody in the board, actually had 5 members of the school board, the CECCE came to the clinic about 2 years ago, and I did a training with them and showed them the overlay testing kits. And now there's someone that goes from school to school. She's the specialist in low vision and hearing. And like even today, I had an order from the school, one of the schools. So I get the orders from the board, and then they filter those out to the classrooms. So somebody, it's either the the education specialist in the school itself, or this woman that travels around from school to school, and she'll identify what is the optimal overlay for that student, and then we'll get orders from the school board. But that's the only board. We haven't, I did address this maybe 5 years ago with the one that's on Hunt Club, the one of the boards, and I went in and I had a meeting, and they're like, no, this is Erlen syndrome, we don't do that. So maybe 5 years later they'll change their tune, but
change
not
takes
at that
time.
point.
Like,
Yeah.
I have a question. Cheshmak has raised her hand, so Cheshmak, I'm gonna unmute your line.
Hi.
Oh, you've done it. Oh no, wait. Okay, no. We're
Hi,
fighting.
can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this super interesting presentation, which I feel is relevant to my kids, but also myself potentially. I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
One of my oldest, all my kids have been diagnosed dyslexic.
Okay.
My oldest, the last little while, has said like words move on her paper and they jump off the page. And myself, I'm suffering right now from burnout that's triggered concussion symptoms.
Okay.
And I was really interested in what you said around visual stress. So I'd definitely be interested in learning more and being in touch and maybe coming in with the kids to see how you might be able to help us. But the question I had is any of this covered by OHIP or private insurance?
So that's a really good question. And when we started this 10 years ago, nothing was covered. And we're now covered by motor vehicle accident insurance. So if you've received a concussion in a motor vehicle accident, they'll cover the cost of the assessment and all the goods. We're now covered by workplace disability. That's been within the last 2 years. So people who are covered by WSIB or Canada Life, those are the two disability insurers who we work with. We are providers for those organizations and get referrals direct from them as well. And then there are employers who often what will happen is the individual will come in, do the assessment, and get the report. The report makes the case for this to be covered for them. So employers are covering the cost. And so not OHIP, and I don't think that will ever happen, but insurance, personal insurance will cover if, for example, you need lenses and a prescription, that portion of it would be covered by your private insurance. So I think you get $250 or $350 every 2 years. You could use that to cover the cost if we combine the prescription with the tint in a frame.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, I don't think I qualify under any of those, but I'll be in touch to learn more anyways.
Perfect.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Cheshma. I have a question here from Debbie, and she said she missed the first half. Is there any permanent improvement as a result of these supportive measures? She's thinking of neuroplasticity and wondering if the brain changes as a result. Great question.
Absolutely. And that's a really good question. I'm just going to write that down because, and we see that with concussion for sure. I can use that example. And we've also, okay, I'll say it a few times, a few different ways. So with a child, and I'll use my daughter as an example. So she had difficulty with balance and coordination. Words moved on the page, trying to do music. The notes never stayed still on the lines. So she's looking at little dots on lines. It didn't stay still. She used overlays and glasses for a few years. But then as her brain matured and it became more able to tolerate the visual image, she didn't need her glasses anymore. So she doesn't need glasses. She just needed them as an accommodation, as a tool while she was going through some difficulties. With people who go through hormonal changes, the brain changes. So that's when they're going through puberty, with pregnancy, with menopause. So the brain changes, and so would the filter. So we've seen changes that way with brain changes. And then with concussion, people, the sooner someone comes to us post-concussion, often the faster the color will change. The analogy we use is like a cast to a brace to a tensor to only needing to use that tensor in certain situations. So they come to us and they get the first accommodation. It's usually more saturated with more gray, but then 8 to 12 months later, they're coming back saying, okay, I only need to wear these when it's really bright, but I need something for when it's less bright. I need to have less accommodation. So that's like we're going to the brace. And then they'll come back. We've had people coming back now that we've had the clinic open for 5 years. We've seen some people go through their healing, through their concussion rehabilitation. And because of the therapies they're doing, their vision therapy, the changes in their prescriptions, the healing of their brain, and all the other work that they're doing, meditating and diet changes, the brain is improving in its ability to tolerate and manage the visual environment. So therefore, they don't need as strong an accommodation with the lenses. So yes, as the brain changes, so does the need for and or strength, I guess, of the filter. I hope that answered your question.
Thanks, Karen. I'll see if Debbie has a follow-up. But I have another question. I've got, I think a lot of us have, what's happened in the last year, very much on the mind with COVID. Are you seeing any correlation or increase in visual stress symptoms as a result of people on their screens more often, or watching more TV, or playing more games, or
yeah, unfortunately, because visual stress is neurological and it can be triggered by those types of visual images, we've definitely had some of our clients who we've seen before saying, oh, I can't deal with it. I need to come back for a tint update. I'm on the computer too much. I need to get reassessed. So they're finding that it is more difficult. I don't know. I can't really say that I've received more inquiries because of COVID and game use, but we've really honestly received even just this last 6 months, so many more referrals, so many more clients wanting to come in and needing help. It could be that, it could just be that the word is getting out. I'm not sure, but yeah, certainly there's a webinar that I did for Brain Injury Canada on the visual influences of screens. And it talks a lot about, in that, I talk a lot about the types of things you can do to reduce screen intolerance and that excess work on the screen. We can't really not do it, but we have to be very proactive about looking away and getting that distance vision, having a plant in the room and being able to look at that plant and give our brains a change from looking at the screen and the scrolling. Yeah, it's pretty tough on the visual system, what's going on these days.
The other thing I was thinking about as you were giving your presentation, I think I came into this knowing about the overlays and the lenses, but I was really interested to hear your suggestions about room atmosphere. Like with room lighting, or using specific colored paper and pens and those sorts of things. Even I remember buying one of those yellow pads of paper and thinking, wow, this seems better or just easier to use for some reason. And I never really thought about it after that, but maybe there's an element of that. Do you find, does that become part of your recommendation to folks when they?
Absolutely. Yeah. In the clinic, like I showed you that book with the 30 different colors of paper, people are given the opportunity in the assessment to go through that notepad or through that booklet and find the paper that works best for them. And it's all stocked in the clinic. So I have Billy bookshelves from IKEA stacked with a rainbow of about 30 different paper colors. And we brought in colored pens as well, brown, orange, and you have an opportunity to try the different color on the different color paper. So if yellow is your color and you're more comfortable with yellow, then maybe writing with an orange pen on that would reduce the contrast and instead of black on yellow, orange on yellow, oh, that's more comfortable. So we do see that people, you know, writing their name on the paper to try and find which color pen works. And they'll pick one. They're like, oh, wow, this turquoise is so much better on the light blue than black.
Oh, that's interesting.
One thing I didn't really get into, and I'd like to mention it now, was the colored light bulbs. I don't know why I missed that. I created this presentation today from an old one, and the idea is when you're in the colorimeter, you're going through all these different colors of light. And one thing that people find really helpful, which we carry as well, but you can buy them at so many different places, are colored light bulbs where you can change the color of the light. So if you find that yellow is your comfort color, you can put the light on yellow. Now, it could just be your task lamp at your desk. It could be your bedside table light. It could be, like in our house, we have something called Philips Hue, and we have 4 light bulbs hanging over the kitchen counter, and we can use our phones to change that to a color that we all agree is comfortable. Now, there are 4 people, so it's hard to find one that's comfortable for all 4 of us. But if you were someone, and people with concussions, they really find this helpful, but it would be also very useful for children in learning when they're doing their studying, is to have this colored light on in their environment, just to help calm the rest of it. And it can be a task light.
Or a disco light.
Or disco light, yes. Yeah, actually, the apps for these colored light bulbs, you can have party mode, you can connect it to your radio so that it plays with the music. Yeah, that's not for visual stress though.
I'll have to get some like yellow contact lenses. That'll be next.
Actually, the tints do come in contacts.
Really?
Yeah.
Ooh. Oh, that's interesting.
So instead of coloring the outside to make your eye look a different color, they tint the middle. So just the black part, they tint the middle.
As the glasses. That's interesting. Yeah. Debbie had a follow-up question actually that came in. Can you repeat the name of the webinar that you mentioned?
Oh, okay. I'd have to look it up to get it for you for sure, but it was Brain Injury Canada. And
is there a link?
You know what? I'll send you a link. When I do the answers to some of these, I'll send a link to BIC webinar.
Perfect.
I don't know if we have it up on our website. There's actually this is a good time to mention it. There's a YouTube channel. Visual Stress Solutions is our YouTube channel, and we are gradually populating this with interviews and with researchers and helpful videos, and this webinar is there, I believe. So that's a good place to go on YouTube, is Visual Stress Solutions. And we're setting things up in playlists. We're like doing different episodes. I've got interviews with people who have been assessed. It's growing. It's one of our projects for this coming year, is to populate that with valuable information for people.
That's a good project while we're all at home.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's because of that, when we had to close the clinic in the early days of COVID, we built a studio, got the lights and the cameras and made the space so that we could do training. I'm going to be developing a training program, like a course for parents to go through, and it'll help guide them through all the different stages, help them. When they sign up for the course, they'll get some overlays and paper and things like that to help them do an at-home assessment and sort of get the accommodation starting. So that's one of the things we're going to be doing with the studio, is that training program, that course, a parent help course.
That's excellent. In response to our sort of talking about the contact lenses, Robert M. would like to know, what about clip-ons?
Thank you, Robert, for that very good question. And that's something I could go back to. Am I sharing my screen still?
You still are, yes. You're on.
Oh, okay. Whoops, here we go. So this image here, it shows the light blue clip-ons. So there are three different ways that you can wear a precision tint. If you already have prescription glasses, but you want to wear a tint with that, we can put them in clip-ons, and we make a custom clip-on to go over your existing frames. You can also buy frames that have a clip-on that comes with them. So we can take out that sunglass clip and put in a precision tint, but it has to be the right type of clip-on with a screw that opens. So that's something to keep in mind. Fit over frames are frames that you wear over top of your glasses, but they can also be worn by themselves. So if somebody has reading glasses and they want to have the tint over the reading glasses, but they don't wear glasses for distance, then that option is good for both. They can wear them by themselves or they can wear them over their glasses. And then the third way is we can incorporate a prescription with the tint, whether it's a bifocal, a multifocal. We order the prescription from our lab in the UK, they tint it, they send it here, and then the lab here assembles it into the frames.
That's super interesting. I had no idea this had advanced so far, even in the last 5 years.
For sure, yes.
Really, really interesting and great.
Yeah, the referrals we're getting from, like, there's a whole neurology practice that we get like little prescription chits from the neurologists. And yeah, it's really wonderful to see that because they're seeing their patients come back to them and tell them how well it worked, they're starting to then see how helpful it is and send other patients our way.
That's great. Karen, I think we've come to the end of the questions.
Okay.
So what we'll do is if someone thinks of a question 5 minutes after we get off, please feel free to email me. I can pass it along to Karen. And everyone who has registered for tonight's session will receive a copy of the recording and an attachment of the slides as well. And what we can do is if there's any special resources that you'd like to provide, I can include those, Karen.
Okay, good. And they can also go on our website at opticon.ca. There's an area where they can send in an inquiry.
Perfect.
So they can do a self-test. There's a quick self-test there. It's not as detailed as this visual stress checklist, but they can also send inquiries to the website as well.
Perfect. And I'll include your contact information and link to your website as well.
Perfect.
That's great. Well, thanks so much on behalf of the LDA and everyone here tonight. I just want to say thanks, Karen, for this really great session.
You're very welcome.
This was really, really interesting, and you know, it's great to learn something on a Tuesday night, which can be helpful to so many.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to get in front of more people, because really that's what this is all. That's why we're doing this, to help people like us with children like ours get to the next level, understand them better, and provide them with some things that can help them understand why they're experiencing this and help them get through it as well.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Karen. Have a great. Thanks again, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight.